are live. My name is John Paul Berg, and this is another episode of The Way Forward, a weekly podcast regarding monetary reform and Douglas social credit. Today, we will be discussing taxation. Why is it so high under the present system? What purposes does it serve under the present system? And what will taxation look like under Douglas social credit? So with that said, I'm going to throw it right over to you, Oliver, to get us started.
Well, I thought that a good place to start this evening is just to sort of take a survey of all the taxes that we do pay, right? You've got personal income tax, federal and provincial or territorial. You've got payroll taxes, other forms of social contributions for the pension, employment insurance, and so forth. We've got sales taxes, of course, the goods and services tax, the harmonized sales tax and provincial sales taxes. We have property taxes. There's corporate income taxes. You've got fuel, carbon, or we had carbon, motor vehicle related taxes, sin taxes, which I learned about in high school. So it's taxes on things like alcohol, tobacco, and now cannabis. And then, of course, you've got all sorts of levies and user fees for all sorts of government services. So according to the Fraser Institute, right, which calculates this every year, Tax Freedom Day in Canada falls currently on June the 9th. So from the 1st of January to June the 9th, if you were to pay all your taxes that I just mentioned, if you were to pay all of those up front, it would take you till June the 9th to pay everything that you owe, and it would only be on June the 10th that you would actually start to work for yourself. So that is about 43.5% of the average income or average family household income. And in some provinces, it's a bit earlier, and in some provinces, it's a bit later because of differences in taxes. But in the country as a whole, you're looking at June the 9th. Now, in the United States, just as a point of comparison, their Tax Freedom Day comes on April 16th, and they're paying roughly 29% of their incomes in taxes. So 29% of the year working for the government. All right. So it's, in both countries, it's quite burdensome. And we can ask ourselves, well, if we're paying all of this money in taxes, are we getting our dollars worth in government production and government services? And one of the problems, of course, we have in the current system that says that it's a democracy is that the government very often is paying for things that many citizens don't approve of and do not want their tax money to be funding. So, if you think of all the discretionary spending, billions of dollars, let's say, spent arming the Ukraine, or, millions of dollars here and there to study or to promote, let's say, transgenderism in the third world. If we lived in a real democracy, and this is very much in line with Douglas's political thinking, we should be able to say, as far as discretionary spending is concerned, I don't want my tax dollars to go and fund that particular program, and so give me a refund, or don't spend, better yet, don't spend the money in the first place. You should be able to opt out of those sorts of things, because the whole theory of democracy is that the government is respecting the will of the people. And when you elect a government and then they decide, without even consulting you, that they want to spend it on things that vast swaths of the population don't agree with, you can't really speak in any reasonable sense of democracy. So that just sort of lays out the land of the general tax situation.
I also think it's relevant to mention that it's almost 1/4 of all the taxes collected goes to simply paying the debt. That's where we are now at this point. So, that's a very alarming statistic. Thinking about what we're getting back, we're not getting anything back, let alone compared to what's going to the debt. What are your thoughts regarding this, Andre?
You were mentioning 25%. The actual amount is $90 billion per year. But like I say all the time, those zeros, lots of zeros, people they cannot grasp the meaning of it. For them, it's either irrelevant or they just don't understand it. And the one thing that I can mention is Oliver was talking about democracy. Since when elections are respected, I'm not sure it is respected today, in a sense that, like he said, we vote for somebody. First of all, they probably rig the election. The second thing is that after that they will bribe people so they can cross the floor. And if it doesn't work, maybe there are other ways to undermine the electoral process. I will always say taxes are thieved, in the sense that we are stuck with compound tax. Tax over tax. It's quite funny, the GST and the provincial tax. You remember at first, when they implemented the GST, they were implementing the GST on the provincial tax. You say, wait a second, you're taxing the tax. This is quite fascinating. You can multiply some example. Car loan. You buy a new car, you finance your car for 4 years, and decide after 2 years that you change your car, and you buy a new one, and the car salesman will tell you, okay, we will refinance. That you're financing a loan already. So you're accumulating taxes. Oliver was mentioning 47%. In Quebec, it's practically 52%, depending on the bracket. And we are stuck in this system. We have no recourses. Think about impeachment in the United States. We don't have this in Canada, first of all. You cannot remove somebody from power, except, I think, and correct me, gentlemen, I think in Alberta or in British Columbia, they have a mechanism to, I would say, to not impeach, but to invalidate the power of a NMLA, for example. I think that's one thing. The other thing that I can mention is one other example. In Quebec, we have what we call the transfer tax. It is a taxe de bienvenue. People, they think it is welcome tax, welcome. Yes, okay. It was the minister Bienvenu at the time that implemented this tax, because when somebody was buying a new house and moving, he had to change his address, and all the public services had to be updated. Firefighter, municipal tax, everything, school tax. So the process was very long, but today it's practically instantaneous. Because it's computerized. But they never changed the percentage. So I take an example of $500,000 house that you buy, you will pay $27,000 of what we call transfer tax, and there's no work done. Nothing. We can talk about decoupling work from income. There's no work done, but there's a tax. In a sense, all those systems are completely out of control. And today, the government or most people, they just don't want to tackle the problem, because it's either too complicated or they will be afraid to lose something in the exercise.
I think it's worth mentioning too. I mean, it's not even so much that we don't get much for our taxes. I mean, our infrastructure is crumbling. Our healthcare system is barely functioning. Our economy is in recession presently, but they're using our tax dollars against us and against our better interests. When you look at how the temporary foreign worker programs are subsidized by the taxpayer, when you look at how the state-sponsored media in Canada, that's where your tax dollars are going to, propagandizing other Canadians. It's really demoralizing when you think of it. So we're being taxed at this ridiculous rate, and they're proactively using our money against our better interests. And that's where we're at in Canada. What are your thoughts, Oliver?
Well, you touched on something that we'll have to elaborate on a bit further. Under the existing financial system, the federal government, provincial governments, municipal governments, when they don't have enough tax revenue to cover all their spending obligations, and they borrow from the banking system. And because of the way the system is set up, basically certain private institutions or persons end up with the financial assets, the treasuries, securities, things like that. So every year, depending on what the interest rate is, we have to, of course, cover the interest bill. And according to the information I looked at this afternoon in preparation for our show, the amount of interest that you have to pay on public debt, federal, provincial, municipal, is about 10% of all tax revenue, right? That's just the interest. So that is basically, this is not really appreciated by a lot of people, but there was a German economist by the name of Helmut Kreutz who looked at this very carefully, and he estimated that in most, let's say, Western countries that are running this kind of system, that basically what's happening is when you look at what people pay directly and indirectly in interest payments, especially, of course, through the tax system, and what they earn from interest on financial assets, what's basically happening is that there's a kind of redistribution occurring where money is being redistributed from the economy as a whole to the top 10%. So the bottom 80%, they pay more than they receive, but the top 10% receive more than they pay. And this is why the system stays. It's one reason, I suppose, why public debt is forever increasing, because there are certain segments of the population that do very well out of the interest that is then has to be paid on these debts. And we should point out that for anyone new joining the program, the money that's being borrowed and spent, they're not, in the main, they're not borrowing pre-existing money or somebody's money that's someone's invested. They create the money that they spend. And so it is possible, and certainly has been the case in various jurisdictions, where if the government needs money, it would, let's say, borrow from a public bank at the cost of administration or very low rates of interest. And that would be one way of saving the taxpayers a lot of money, instead of redistributing money from, let's say, society as a whole to the upper 10%. So there's a whole redistribution, like a trickle up effect, that characterizes the existing system, which not too many people are aware of.
Yeah, I don't think too many people are aware of any of this. It's like we're totally economically illiterate. And I mean, I was guilty of this prior to meeting you gentlemen and finding Douglas social credit and actually understanding where money comes from, learning about the gap. And I think that's where many of us are. You think of the amount of orthodox economists out there that don't even understand this stuff. Like, they exist within the confines of the very limited perspective that they were taught. And they even feel more emboldened about it because they have some credentials that tell them how smart they are. So they're even less receptive to even wrestling with an idea like Douglas social credit. But that's the biggest problem. What we endeavor to do with this show is educate people regarding these issues, because once you understand this, you truly understand how the magic trick works, and you can't look at the world in the same way. So that's just a perfect segue for me to appeal to the audience to please share the stream, even potentially send it to someone that you think might enjoy this content, because we're very heavily suppressed. With that said, Andre, I'll throw it over to you, sir.
You mentioned, orthodox economists, and I did not study economy, but I make a budget since 45 years, and people were making fun of me all the time because I have Excel file and I prepare everything. I never spend more than I earn. That's the first thing. So when you look at the idea of creating debt, you know that one day, first of all, somebody will benefit from it. because you borrow money. It is not free, like Oliver mentioning all the time. It's not free credit money. You have to pay interest on it or fees. And then you will have to either delay the liquidating of your income, because if you borrow money today, you will have to pay back tomorrow. So tomorrow, your income will not be there to liquidate the cost. I think Oliver has explained this all the time, the fact that borrowing money is a way to delay the liquidation of the actual cost of production. When I think about the debt, the concept of the debt, if I'm in debt to you, it means that we took a risk together. This is what I tried to explain last year when we were in Rougemont, briefly. We share a risk. And I think we can refer to the dividend that was described by Douglas. If the production is lower, of course the dividend will be lower, because the goods and services will not be there. So you will say to people, okay, you have to work more. But the fact that work is coupled with income is embedded in the mind of people. They cannot understand that if tomorrow they receive a dividend, it means that the production is strong enough and will sustain the income. And I think many people cannot understand this. You can bring the quote from Strugatsky just for the pleasure of this small quote. Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, they were Russian, Soviet Union writer. They wrote many novels that were put in a movie. But in a small novel, Hard to Be God, you have 250 people who come from planet Earth, and they go to the planet Akanar, and they have to observe. They cannot intervene, and they have to observe. And one of the observer, when he realized that he is very angry because he's seeing all those flaws in the system, people are taking advantage of each other, and he was talking about what's the purpose of free speech, for example. And he's saying simple folks have to know their place. God did not give them a tongue for talking, but for licking the boots of their master, the noble Lord who has been placed above them from the very beginning of time. I want to say to people, we struggle with socialism on one side, we struggle on capitalism on one side, or the left and the right, and we do not tackle the real problem. How come we cannot live in peace and flourish and live in dignity today, even if the means of production are so industrialized that we should be happy? For example, I'm not a fan. I think artificial intelligence does not exist. This is not intelligent. It's algorithm, and you could bring the ethic factor in it. But still, those innovation, they do not benefit all the people. They are captured by a small group of individuals, and they monopolize it, and they use it against us. I think in many ways, it's an old model, or divide and conquer, but it's also dominate. And the what I call the ruling class, I did not invent the term. The ruling class know what it's doing by monopolizing life, and by providing or forbidding people to understand the system of Douglas. I think maybe that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to tell people, just think out of the box. Don't think socialism, capitalism. Don't think in a Manichaean way. Try to see the flaws in the system. And then after that, maybe you can ask yourself, even if you're not an economist, you don't have to be an economist. You just look at your own budget. You spend more than you earn. That's the first thing. After that, you can ask yourself, do I like my job? No, but I need an income. So the income is coupled to work. That's what Douglas was trying to explain.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It resonates with me too, because for me personally on my journey, I could see a lot before I discovered Douglas social credit. I was very much stuck in that parameters, in those synthetic parameters between capitalism and socialism. I knew socialism was dreadful. I read extensively about Marxism, and it comes from resentment and forced equity. I knew that was wrong. But that naturally made me then think, well, capitalism must be right, because I could only see the world through those two extremes. And that's where I think the vast majority of people are. And I'm no different. I'm not trying to present myself as being special. I was very much there too. I was leaning more towards the Austrian system, like gold standard, deregulation. I thought that, and just for that simple fact, because I knew socialism was wrong. And then I think we have a lot of people like that, and then we have the antithesis of that. We have people that are hypersensitive to all of the flaws of capitalism, or this version of capitalism, whatever you would call it. And they are the opposite. So they think then, well, socialism is the obvious answer. And that's one of the biggest problems that we're presented with. I really think it's everyone is always trying to put this in one of those categories, and this absolutely obliterates that false binary. What are your thoughts, Oliver?
One thing that I wanted to mention, in connection with all this talk about taxation, according to C.H. Douglas, there's a technical flaw in the financial system. According to the way it's designed, we're always generating costs and prices faster than we're distributing income with which those costs and prices can be met. So there's a reason why there's so much, deficit spending, whether it's done at the federal, provincial, or municipal level. And it's done to help fill that gap. Right? If the economy is chronically anemic, that it doesn't have enough consumer buying power to offset whatever it's produced and trying to purchase, then one way of compensating is to get the government to borrow additional money into existence and to spend more than it taxes. So there's this whole sort of gap filling purpose that is served by government debt, and government debt that's perpetually increasing. There are some people who say, when you're talking about the Austrian school, or let's say people on the right, the conventional right, they'll say, oh, no, we should have balanced budgets. The government should not spend more than it receives in taxes. You can do that, and that has been achieved at various times for short periods of time. But because there's this chronic underlying gap, all you're really doing is shifting the burden of filling it to the private sector. So there's going to have to be more consumer borrowing. There's going to have to be businesses which will borrow more and expand in the hopes that they'll be able to sell their goods and services in a subsequent period. Countries are going to try and export more than they import. In other words, you're just shifting the burden to all the other palliatives. And under the Douglas social credit system, where you fill this gap with an injection of debt-free credit distributed as a dividend directly to each citizen, and indirectly in the form of the compensated price discounts, you end up balancing the economy. So there's no need at that point for the government at any level to borrow more than it receives, to borrow money in order to fill this gap. So that in itself would help to make for a smaller government, and it would help to lower taxation. Because even if you maintain the present system, well, if you eliminate government debts, you eliminate the interest that is owed on those debts. And so that's already one way that shifting to a Douglas social credit system would help us to reduce the tax burden by reducing the reliance on public debt.
So what are your thoughts on that, Andre?
Well, I think one point that is quite important, Oliver mentioned, transferring the burden to the private sector. So you can see this when you balance the budget in the government. You will eventually have to fill this gap. And I think we are playing with this system all the time, transferring the debt to somebody. I always make jokes about, what is a socialist and what is a capitalist. A capitalist is somebody who robs you, and a socialist is somebody who spend the money that the capitalists rob from you. And we are stuck in a system where you always have people who will benefit from the system. The money is concentrated, the money and the power are concentrated at the top, and everybody is benefiting from it. No matter what, John Paul, you benefit, I benefit. Why? Because we receive pension, we receive income, and we. It's funny because the government always, we will give you tax credit. It's our money. You don't give us nothing. It's our money. You're just there to manage it. You're not there to say that you were giving us a gift. It does not work like that. But they act like it's their money, so they can implement any type of system. We have no way, no recourse, and no accountability anymore. Did we ever have any? I'm not even sure of that today. I think we have to question not only the politician and not only the government. We have to question ourselves. How do we perceive an economic system? We take the expression social credit all the time, but there's another expression. It is economic democracy. Personally, I don't think we live in a democracy today. So if we don't live in a democracy, how can you implement the economic democracy? You cannot. You need both terms. You need a democracy, so people, they need accountability. And after that, you need a system that will not concentrate the wealth and power in a few hands of individual.
It's funny. That's like a testament to the level of disconnect from people. There's a lot of people that will celebrate these GST rebates and these grocery rebates without even realizing, like, they're giving you a fraction of the money that they took from you, just a fraction of it back, and you're celebrating them. That's how normalized and conditioned we are to not see the flaws in this system. It's like we're all under some kind of black magic spell, and we sincerely can't see how, because once you start to learn it, it's ludicrous and you're insulted. That's why I continuously use that analogy. Like, it's like seeing how the trick works, and then you're kind of impervious to it now. You can't go back into that illusion, but unfortunately, that's where so many people still are presently. Your thoughts, Oliver?
When you talk to people about taxation and the fact that it's insanely high, I mean, 43% of people's income, we've become habituated to this as if it was normal, but it's not normal. It's crazy. But when you talk about these things, people will say, well, we have to fund the social programs. This is why taxation has to be as high as it is. Otherwise, how are you going to fund the public pensions and the unemployment insurance and welfare and so on and so forth? And the beauty, one of the beautiful things about the Douglas social credit system is that if you fill the gap with compensatory consumer credit, free of debt, you give everyone a national dividend, you have a national discount, a lot of these social programs would no longer be necessary, right? So if everyone's receiving a national dividend, do you need unemployment insurance? If everyone's receiving a national dividend, do you need welfare? If everyone's receiving a national dividend, do you need public pensions? Then you can go on and on. So, if the government were not derelict in its duty, one of its fundamental duties, which is to exercise sovereignty over the money system and ensure that it's designed properly and that it's serving the common interest, the interest of every citizen. If it were not derelict and we did have national dividends and compensated discounts in lieu of all the conventional palliatives, then a lot of those social programs would be redundant. We wouldn't need them, or they would be drastically reduced. And if we don't need them and they're drastically reduced, well, you don't need all that tax revenue to fund them either. So you can reduce taxes. And you can go a step further. If you have a Douglas social credit system in place, you're not going to need all these bureaucracies either to, monitor, administer, implement all these various social programs. So there would be a great economy in the bureaucracy. and that would save even more money. So what I'm trying to get across is that if the financial system were properly designed, if we regulated money, which is the regulator of economic activity, appropriately, in line with reality, in line with natural law, for the common interest, for the public interest, then government could be much smaller. A lot of things could be simplified and streamlined, and taxes would be a lot lower because you wouldn't have all these tax burdens that we currently rely on to maintain some semblance of social stability.
Yeah, it's very much should be appealing to the left and the right and the so-called libertarian people. Like it's and what I'm noticing about meeting all these various social creditors is a lot of people come from the traditional left and the traditional right to this. It just captures people. And I'm a firm believer that once you wrestle with Douglas social credit, you get converted. I can't see if you're looking at this in good faith and you're being objective, how you can't come to the conclusion that the three of us have come to, and many others. And that's why, for me, I'm just compelled to just try to explain this to people. It's that profound for me. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, you're mentioning John Paul faith. That's quite interesting because there's a lot of people who have faith in the actual system, even if it doesn't work. We can look at the national debt, which is monstrous, and look at the younger generation. They're starting to look at this and they're saying to themselves, "Well, it's the boomer. People have spent too much. They benefit from a good life, and now we will have to pay for them." The gap is always there, no matter which generation you will analyze. Think about the bureaucracy. We have civil servant. I think since 2020, the level of bureaucracy in the federal government increased 22%. Means that you hire more and more people and you pay them, and I'm pretty sure their jobs are useless. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, your jobs are useless. But we have to give you an income for whatever reason, and maybe social stability, and we have to tax people because we have to pay you. In a sense, like I say, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's not complicated. And the way to make sure that the Ponzi scheme will continue to work, it's always the same thing in a Ponzi scheme. First in will make money, and the last who arrives in will lose everything. That's the concept of a Ponzi scheme. You need growth. And if you need growth, you need demography. And if you don't have a good birth rate, what you will do, you will rely on mass immigration. And I'm sorry to say this, it's the actual old concept of cheap labor. The more you have people on the market, the more you have competition, and the more you can lower the wages. That's a classical concept of, I would say, not only neoliberalism, just capitalism. We always play offer and demand. I'm sorry, offer and demand. Oliver is always mentioning the gap between the cost of production and the income or the consumption. How come we don't have the income to liquidate our own production? Somebody must take its cut somewhere. It's not just the monopoly of bank. It's also what Oliver is mentioning. There's a flaw in the system, and because you don't have this concept of free credit money, somebody's making money out of the system. And I think we have to explain more this concept because there are many flaws in the system. Oliver's mentioning flaws, but there are many of them. In his book, Social Credit Economic, he's describing all those flaws. And this is maybe what we have to do. Describe them in I would say more, I will use the expression of Mr. Payman Ascari, in lay terms.
Very good. It's like we're fast approaching an era where we are going to very much require an income that's not attached directly to work. And I've been saying this a lot, but it's worth repeating. The ruling class as it stands are going to be desperate to usher us into some kind of socialist system with a UBI. And a UBI sounds suspiciously similar to a national dividend, but it's not at all. It's not at all, and it's going to come with attached strings. There's going to be, any time that you deviate from their orthodoxy, they can then hold that over you. They can leverage this UBI against you. A national dividend is nothing like that. It's your entitlement as a stakeholder in the productive capacity of the country, essentially. What are your thoughts on this, Andre? Or sorry, Oliver. Getting confused.
I did the numbers on this once. I'm kind of going from memory, but of course, in a Douglas social credit society, if you're going to have public production, public goods and services, for example, national defense, the post office, so on and so forth, obviously you've got to pay for that in some way. So, in a Douglas social credit system, we'd anticipate that taxes would be much, much less than what they are now. And from what I recall, you're looking at, it could be a little bit less, a little bit more, but you're looking at maybe, instead of 43.5%, maybe 10%. That would mean that under a Douglas social credit system, perhaps Tax Freedom Day would come on February the 6th. Now, does that sound good to people? In terms of selling the system, if we can not just maintain but improve the standard of living, and at the same time drastically reduce taxation, isn't that something that should attract people? Douglas did say that, as far as he was concerned, he was not in favor of forms of taxation, direct forms of taxation, such as income tax or even property tax. How crazy is it that you earn a certain amount of money at your job, and before you even see it, it's been a certain portion of it has been confiscated. Right? It's Douglas preferred indirect taxation because then you have some control. If you don't want to pay the sales tax, well, then you don't buy that particular item. Right? It gives more control to the taxpayer. If you don't like the government's doing, well, you can attempt to be more self-sufficient. At the very least, they can't. They're not going to be able to seize your income. And when it comes to property tax, Douglas observed that just because you own property doesn't mean necessarily that you've got an income with which to pay the taxes. And I think he was quite sensitive to what had happened in England, where over the course of the centuries, a lot of the aristocracy had become increasingly dispossessed, because while they had property, they did not necessarily have the purchasing power to pay the taxes that were being levied by the government on that property, and which ended up sort of corroding the whole social system, because the aristocrats lived in accordance with their own moral code, the customs, where they had some responsibility for the people that were living on their estates, to look after them, to help them out, as you see, for example, in Downton Abbey. And with the advent of the modern state, they were forced either to sell their property or to marry into the merchant class, the plutocracy, in order to maintain their position in society, because that gave them access to credit with which they could then pay the taxes. And you see that also in Downton Abbey. So I think, one of the selling points of social credit is much lower taxation, much smaller and less powerful governments. Why would anyone object to that?
And it's very kind of like counterintuitive, because you think everyone's going to get a national dividend. You're thinking more taxes, just instinctively being conditioned by the parameters we kind of exist in economically. And it's very much to the contrary. It's like I say, this system serves both sides of this left-right slave dialectic that we're seeing everyone exist within. I just want to take a moment. We have about 50 people watching presently, which is abnormally low. My X account is just ridiculously deboosted. So if I could appeal to everyone to please share the stream, it's very advantageous for us. And I will say, if anyone has any questions, we will be getting to the question portion of the show probably around 50 minutes. So at this point, we have a small video that kind of illustrates some of what we've been discussing. I'm going to play that. We're going to do another round of comments on the video, and then we'll jump right over to the questions.
Episode 25, Social Credit, Government Spending, and Taxation. We are often told that high levels of taxation, plus the continual expansion of governmental power and its accompanying bureaucracies, are necessary for the smooth operation of a modern society. But what if none of that is true? According to the social credit analysis of Major C.H. Douglas, not to be confused with Chinese social credit, taxation could and should be substantially less, and governments could and should be substantially smaller than they both are at present. To begin with, the liberation of the economy from artificial constraints via the introduction of an accurate financial system would drastically reduce the public debt loads at all levels of government. When the economy as a whole can consume whatever it produces without having to go into debt to do so, the need for public debt is drastically reduced. As a result of this reduction, there should be a corresponding reduction in the taxes necessary to service those public debts, i.e., to cover debt repayments and interest charges. The introduction of a national dividend in a modern economy, in conjunction with compensated prices, should also render many government social programs redundant, or at least reduce the need for them. Universal entitlements such as child and family allowances, unemployment benefits, public pensions, disability benefits, welfare, and so forth might be replaceable with national dividend payments. The deductions and other taxes that are supposed to cover these programs would thenceforth be eliminated. These two major changes to the fiscal life of governments, i.e. the obsolescence of ever-increasing public indebtedness and of many of the social programs, will result in the reduction in, if not the entire elimination of, various bureaucracies that are dedicated to 1. The servicing of public debts, 2. The implementation, administration, and monitoring of different social programs, and 3. The collection of taxes and the penalization of evaders. This purging of the civil service, most of its current membership perform jobs that are not objectively justified in light of the physical facts of our productive capacity, would likewise lower the costs of government operations even further. In these ways, the introduction of the social credit monetary reform is likely to do away with much of the taxation with which we are familiar, namely the illegitimate, unnecessary, and counterproductive forms. It would also allow governments to reinvent themselves as smaller, more streamlined, and service-minded organizations that strictly follow the rule of law, while operating within clearly defined constitutional limitations. Naturally, insofar as governments would continue to provide certain public goods and services in a social credit commonwealth, taxation in one form or another would continue to exist. While it is certainly true that taxation could be eliminated entirely under social credit by using a certain proportion of the compensatory debt-free money earmarked for the compensated price and the national dividend to fund government activities in full, thereby distributing the resultant goods and services to the public for free, this would take some control over credit away from the individual and re-centralize it in the hands of the group. It is absolutely crucial that individual citizens exercise some real control, either directly or indirectly through their elected representatives, over the amounts and purposes for which financial credit is to be employed by government. To this end, taxation might be expected to take two different forms in a social credit commonwealth. User fees for all those government services that benefit some small or limited section of the population, such as driver's licenses, hunting permits, boating fees, etc., and a universal sales tax to cover those day-to-day operations of government that benefit everyone. Parliament, national defence, the operations of the National Credit Office, the Post Office, public medical insurance, and so forth. It should be noted that Douglas vehemently opposed direct methods of taxation, such as income taxes, capital gains taxes, inheritance taxes, and property taxes, etc., which he thought crude, complicated, inequitable, and/or tyrannical, and opted instead for indirect methods of taxation, such as sales taxes. A universal sales tax would represent a small rise in the price level of goods, which had been adjusted below its present levels by the national discount. This animated series was sponsored by the Clifford Hugh Douglas Institute for the Study and Promotion of Social Credit.
So those animated videos, there's 42 of them, and they're an excellent resource for anyone who actually wants to learn exactly how this works. At this point, I believe we're about 8 episodes in, so we're talking about it as if everyone already has an understanding. So this is a good segue for me to let anyone know, like, there is no dumb questions. This is very new to the vast majority of people that are encountering it. So please ask any question in the chat, and we promise to get to it. So I'll let you start us off. Oliver, do you want to expand upon the video a little bit?
Well, one thing that I think Andre already touched on, there is so much waste within the present system, right? So there's this recurring gap. One of the main ways of filling it is through government deficit spending. And that means, the government provision of certain goods and services. And at the same time, the economy is committed to a policy of full employment. So one way of distributing income to people who otherwise wouldn't have an income, and also filling the gap through government deficit spending, is to employ people in all these bureaucracies that are, introducing, monitoring, administrating all the social programs. But from a point of view of efficiency and resolving the problems directly with the least amount of trouble to everyone, these jobs, while they do serve a purpose under the present system, there's really no good reason for them to exist. I'm sorry to have to say that. But it's, those people are wasting their time. They're wasting other people's time. And under a sane financial system, they could spend their time far more profitably, whether that's in the economy or outside of paid employment. But right now, they are there basically to help the system to muddle through, to carry on, because it's so dysfunctional. They're a symptom of the dysfunctionality of the system. And unfortunately, the human being what it is, people get used to this. They come to rely on it. They're afraid of change, and that is one of the things that we have to overcome, is this psychological resistance to change. But the existing system is not financially sustainable, and with automation and AI, it's not going to be technologically sustainable either.
Yeah, it's a really good point, man. I think in Canada, it's 1 in 4 people employed are employed in the public sector. That's so they're very much incentivized to grow the government. Like that's where they are. Like if you're looking at voting, I don't think voting really matters personally. I'll throw it over to you, Andre, to make some comments, and then we'll jump over to the questions.
Oliver was mentioning, lowering bureaucracy, and you're mentioning John Paul, do the election matter anymore? I don't think either that they matter. One thing I've noticed in the small clip of Douglas, I think if we would implement a system like that, we will displace all labor, actual labor, in another economic model. Take a bureaucrat. He's working, I'm sorry to say this, his job is useless, but he's paid the $200,000. And you tell him, okay, you know what? We will just reallocate the money in form of a dividend, and you will do something useful. Maybe you will appeal to a lot of people, but maybe, like Oliver mentioned, Some of them, they will say, no, 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 I'm comfortable with my job. I love my job. I'm sorry. I've met a lot of people. We do a little bit of psychology, and you look at them, how they behave and not what they say, and you imagine that they don't necessarily love their job. One thing that I've noticed, you have, with socialism, you don't have taxation. Nobody has nothing. Nobody owns nothing. You receive food stamp. My wife is from Soviet Union. She was telling me how it was, and it is quite ludicrous to understand that. Forget about private property. This is where we're going now, maybe in the Western world. And in capitalism, like Oliver mentioned, you are starting to work for yourself, quote unquote. I'm not even sure if working for yourself is gratifying, but after 5-6 months, what is happening with our system? I will end on one thing. We hope that we can change the system. I always say policies, they change when politicians die. So we have an opportunity, because this system is so shaking that the house of cards is practically falling. Nobody wants to touch it. And they were talking about derivative product, and people were saying, even the economists, they say, we don't understand how it works. Just don't touch it. Don't touch the system, because if we remove one card, it will all collapse. And I think we're very close to this, up to a point where most people, if we present an alternative solution that would make life more fair, we would reintegrate a good moral code. I think people will start to be attracted to this system. You cannot do it with coercion. It doesn't work. They have to feel that there is something in it for them.
I agree. And I think once they start to learn about it, I think they will conclude that there is something in it for them. It's like I said, it's what's very unique about this is it appeals to everyone. Everyone should be advocating for Douglas social credit, as far as I'm concerned. So with that said, we're going to go over to the questions, and we're going to get it started with Bob Lior, our biggest fan, so to speak. What is the social credit view on chartalism? Are tax liabilities needed to drive acceptance of a token currency by the public? We'll start it with you, Oliver.
Yeah, so this is an idea that is closely connected with modern monetary theory. And the idea is that what gives value to money is the fact that the government demands to be paid in the money of the realm, and legal tender. And so this is what gives value to money. And Douglas would say that what gives value to money, regardless of what it's made out of, is the fact that there are goods and services that people will accept in exchange for the money, or there is a useful, productive capacity that can be catalyzed through the instrumentality of money. So even if there were no taxes, money would still have value. People would still want money because they could use it to buy things with, and it's ultimately what we call the real credit, the useful productive capacity, and the flow of real wealth that gives value to money, not the fact that the government is demanding to be paid with currency, let's say.
So for me, this is far beyond my my range of knowledge. So I'll throw it right over to you, Andre. Do you have any thoughts on this one?
Thank you. I will remind this, John Paul. I'm not even familiar with the term chartalism, but I would say something. Just a brief comment. Matching the financial system should match the physical economy, and it is not what we're seeing actually. We can inflate the economy, we can deflate the economy, we can print money. Money is a token. Money, anything can be money. But don't forget one thing. In money, you have the concept credit. You have the concept of credo, trust. And I refer sometimes to. I was challenging Maxime Bernier 2 years ago on gold standard. I think he didn't like what I was saying. I was asking him, what about gold standard and what about cryptocurrency? The cryptocurrency are a symptom of a loss of trust. People don't trust in the systems. They want to bury their gold in their garden, or they want to buy crypto because they want to secure their investment or their saving. It does not work. It has to be based on trust. And money today, you cannot trust it. We saw it with Chrystia Freeland. They froze the bank account of a lot of people, just like that. So in a sense, creating, with the question, social credit view and Chartelism, our tax liability need to drive acceptance of a token currency public. If you want to accept something, you have to believe in it, you have to trust it. Else, what will happen? We will drift toward a black market. People are starting already. It's quite easy. You can just say, okay, I will pay. If I pay cash, no taxes. And I have some experience with this, and it was quite fascinating how people they can accept easily to go on black market because they are strangled by the system. The system is completely dysfunctional, if not tyrannical, and we have to implement something different.
Yeah. In fact, what you've just said there, Andre, the existence of the black market is perhaps a counterexample to the whole chartless thesis, because those people who are in the black market, they're not wanting money in order to pay taxes. They're in the black market. They're not paying taxes.
They're not paying taxes.
They still want money.
Well, and you can refer to, for example, the prohibition of gun or gun controls. Just come on. If you are a criminal, you will not register your gun. You're outside of the system. This is quite important. More and more people will just go outside of the system because they don't trust it anymore. And we are arriving at a point where people will start to, I don't want to advocate for violence, but people will take justice in their own hand because they cannot sustain it anymore. And the government who are in power now, they hear nothing. They just don't live in the same reality as the rest of the population.
You hear a lot of people talking about a parallel economy, something that kind of exists outside the system presently. And I think that's a driver of it for sure. So next question, Jose Bernier. I hate to sound like an alarmist, but the so-called West is becoming contemporary versions of the Mayas, Aztecs, and Incas. Techno-feudalisms. Only Douglas social credit can reverse it. Throw it over to you to start, Oliver.
I think that is true, both in terms of diagnosis and in terms of the prescribed remedy. I think, and I think you've said this too, JP, that the Chinese Communist Party developed this system, and there are controversies and debates about whether it's actually operational in China or the extent that it's operational in China. But you have this model of surveillance and reward punishment system that's been called social credit, which is a complete inversion of the original Douglas social credit, because Douglas was all about empowering the individual in order to reward and punish those who exercise power in society, whether they're bureaucrats or politicians or business people. But it's 180 degrees from what everybody now knows as social credit, and that type of conception is really very much in line with the techno-feudalism, right? So the only way to avoid that or to undo that is to adopt the opposite policy. That the whole point is to enfranchise people so that they can monitor what administrators are doing. People who have power in society, are they using their social power in the common interest, or are they using their social power to advance the interests of an oligarchy? And if you empower the common people in various ways, that they have this ability to reward, to sanction, then you can ensure that we don't go down the road of techno-feudalism. We go down the Douglas social credit road instead.
Yeah, I think it's relevant to mention right now. We're watching the control grid be assembled. We're actually assembling it. It's subsidized by taxpayer revenue, and we are constructing the walls to our prison. I actually initially heard Steve Bannon, who I'm not a huge fan of. I think he's kind of a scumbag, but I heard him initially use the term techno-feudalism, and I thought it's perfect. I frequently say neo-feudalism. What we have presently is not even capitalism. It's nothing resembling it. We're not, it's not capitalism, and we don't live under democracy. We're living under the auspices of some kind of an oligarchy, international finance. A lot of people will give it different names, but I mean, one thing that's for sure is we know how we're being subjugated, and that's through monetary policy. What are your thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, Mr. Bernier is referring to the Mayas, the Aztec, and Inca. I think he's a specialist of South America and Mexico, so it's a very good example. I was using the expression techno-fascism in one of my essays. And the fact that the real definition of fascism, I will not go into detail, but it's everything for the state, nothing outside of the state. So, for example, no black market, and nothing against the state. So no dissident. When I was referring to Strugatsky brother, hard to be a god, this tyrannical society on Arcanar, they are slaughtering intellectual, they're killing people who are academic. So, and I think through the Strugatsky brother, they were referring to the dissidents in the Soviet Union in 1973 when they wrote this book. The Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca, we have a more modern version with Soviet Union, because the repression of the dissidents in Soviet Union was incredible, and they were aware of the social credit doctrine. They just didn't want to implement it or even to analyze it. It's quite fascinating. You say you have an expression that is social credit. Imagine socialists in the Communist Party in the Soviet Union should have said, wow, there's the word social, we should take a look at it. No, they didn't even want to take a look at it. They were afraid of the system. And maybe I have a question for Oliver. The expression social credit, and we always refer to, for example, it's not the system of the control and punishment of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party, did they ever define this expression in reality? I'm starting to suspect that it is, a boogeyman invented by the Western world just to enslave population. Because China, in a economic model, merged capitalism and socialism. They merged the two systems together. For whatever reason, I will not discuss about this. And then you have the opposition, the dialectic that you're always referred to, John Paul. The capitalists or the globalists are saying, wait, we will try to undermine the shift of the global economy. Let's face it, the world first economy in the planet today is China. It's not even America anymore, not even the United States. So up to a certain point, that's a question toward the definition. Maybe they never defined they use the expression to undermine the system of Douglas. Am I wrong?
Well, I don't know if it's defined anywhere. I do know, from what I understand, I don't speak Mandarin, but I do understand from people who do speak Mandarin that there is something in China that does translate as social credit. But it's the system, as I understand it, is inchoate. It's various forms of it have been tried, but there's actually no one national system in operation, although there's the concern that it might evolve in that direction. Regardless, I do think that at least in the Western world, social credit, whether that corresponds to what they actually have in China or not, social credit is being presented as this totalitarian, power centralizing system. And what are the chances that whoever is behind this would have appropriated our term that goes back many, many, many decades before? So up until maybe 2014 or so, if you're talking about social credit, well, there was only one social credit in existence. That was Douglas social credit. And then all of a sudden you've got this other social credit that far more people know about. And we now have to disambiguate the original Douglas social credit from this imposter, right? And I mean, if you talk to ChatGPT or Grok and you say, well, what are the chances that this would be a coincidence? It's something like 1 in several tens of thousands. So it
Go buy a
seems,
lottery ticket. It's more, you will
that's
have
right.
more chance.
I'm a firm believer that's the case. Just by looking into it, just intuitively, that's what my instincts tell me is the case, because I know how deboosted this material is. One more quick point on Jose's question. It's funny because we have this modern arrogance about our civilization and how much more advanced we are and how better we are than every civilization that came before us. We look at cultures like the Incas, who would potentially sacrifice a noble child for their crops that year, and we just think that's barbaric. Well, that's very primitive. They're killing one of their children for the crops. That's nuts. But look at what we're doing in modernity. Look at abortion. We're murdering our children for convenience, because it's inconvenient to have them. We don't want to accept the consequences of our behavior, which if humanity makes it past this era, I think they will judge us harshly for that. That's just, it's evil by no other term. But with that said, we're going to go to the next question. We have a bit of comic relief from Mr. Denton. Careful wearing that shirt in public, Andre. You could put an eye out with those collars. He's on you, Andre.
No comment.
No comment. All right. We will go to JC Denton's real question. For Oliver, can you go into more detail about the German man who spoke how to found money was being funneled to the top 10%? How found money was being funneled to the top 10%?
Yeah. So if you do a Google search, the man's name is Helmut Kreutz, right? So Helmut, Helmut, and then Kreutz, Creutz. And he's passed away now, but I think he still has a website, and he wrote various books and articles. And according to his empirical research, if you look at the various sectors of society, the various tiers, the bottom 80% end up paying more in interest directly and indirectly, let's say through taxation, than they receive. And it's only the top 10% that are receiving more than they pay, even though this is quite interesting, even though they might be paying a greater share of the taxes, nevertheless, they get back more, let's say through holding various financial assets than they're paying. So they're net beneficiaries. And that is the detail that is, a lot of people they haven't even thought of that, right? It hasn't even entered their heads that there actually could be redistribution going on in favor of the very wealthy. And we used to talk about the 1%, with the Occupy movement and all of that, but that's all been memory hold as well. But there's certainly, the system is not there to serve the poor people, quote unquote. They might throw some bones to the poor people for the sake of preventing revolution, but it is designed to serve an oligarchy. So, and what we want to do in social credit is for it to serve the common interest, right? Not to serve an oligarchy, not to serve, let's say, victims. There was, I think we know who's asking the question. I think he'll appreciate this. There was a Persian emperor, Darius, who said that it is not my will that the strong should harm the weak, nor that the weak should harm the strong, right? So all this sort of DEI, affirmative action, that's the weak harming the strong. But at the same time, the strong shouldn't be exploiting the weak, right? So what we need is to forward the common interest so that regardless of who you are relative to anybody else, whether you're at the bottom 10% or the top 10%, the system is operating in the common interest, so that, behind the Rawlsian veil of ignorance, no matter who you are, you're getting a fair deal. It's operating on a level playing field. And that's precisely what we haven't got.
Well said. So we got another one from Bob Lior. Why does the federal government borrow and pay interest on its debt when it could issue its own zero interest rate currency directly into the community? That's the big question. We'll start with you on this one, Andre. What are your thoughts regarding this?
Well, because they're thieves. That will be a very short answer. They're thieves, and they prefer to go on the international market while they instead of being sovereign. Oliver was mentioning sovereignty. We don't have sovereignty now because we're financing the debt on international market. And think about the debt. 2011, the Greek crisis. They could not finance the debt, so they had to downgrade the notation of of Greece. This is another question about a notation agency. It's quite ludicrous, but in a way we don't have any sovereignty, and even it's not even about gold standard. I think zero interest rate. It is this free credit that brings that will eliminate the gap between production and consumption. In a territory, you should have equilibrium. I'm learning a lot of new words from you gentlemen in English. It's quite interesting. My vocabulary is increasing. Equilibrium between production and consumption. Nobody is ever talking about this gap. Yes, we can talk about the monopoly of credit and we talk about financial system, but the gap is the key element in this system. And I think Oliver is mentioning it often. I'm even thinking about, like I said, writing a fairy tale. That the title will be The Gap, and it is a big monster who eats people, and they have to. We can refer to the Aztec too. We have to fill this gap, and we cannot fill it with debt. This is not quite difficult to understand. You cannot sustain your way of life if you don't produce enough. And I think there's a question about the dividend. The dividend will fluctuate. It is not a fixed income. It has to be modulated with the economy.
Very good point. Do you have anything to add to that, Oliver?
In his first book, Economic Democracy, C.H. Douglas said that the state should lend and not borrow. Right. So when it comes to financing public production, there's no good reason really for the government to borrow money, let's say, from private markets when it can borrow from a public bank. And this has been done. It was done in Australia with the Commonwealth Bank, and that was a public bank. They financed Australia's activities, at least partially, in the First World War. They also constructed the Intercontinental Railway, and also apparently with the Bank of Canada from, I guess, 1938 to 1974, to at least some extent, things like the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Trans-Canada Highway, were financed through the kind of mechanism that I think Bob is referring to.
Very good. So we have one from Gary. What if the government decides it deserves a bigger raise for all their hard work? Also, could you have AI distributing these credits? That's obviously the government always decides they require a bigger raise, but the AI distributing these credits, that's kind of interesting. What are your thoughts on that, Andre?
Well, it was in 2023. The French government voted a 30% raise just after the tie up with COVID. Everybody we're seeing their wages going down, and suddenly, and they all voted. 125 MP MLA voted unanimously to because they were so dedicated to what they were doing during what I call the health tyranny. AI distributing this credit, you need ethics. You need a human eye to monitor and to supervise and to take decision. You can use algorithm to help you structure the economic system. We have all the technology today to match or to supervise all the data, because there's a huge amount of data, especially now because they will all have those data center. Maybe we can suggest them which data they could collect and not the data that they think they should collect on us.
Yeah, I think when it comes to government accountability, the big need is for effective sanctions in the hands of the citizens to control government. And when it comes to the government voting themselves a raise, I mean, it's just ludicrous that that's permitted in the system. I have often thought, if the members of parliament are supposed to be representative, then perhaps their salary should be pegged to the average salary in their riding, instead of being paid how much, 200,000 or whatever it is that they're getting. If the average salary is 40,000, well, that's what you're getting. And then you would see immediately how many people would no longer have any interest in politics, and we'd be better off without those people being in politics because they're in it for the wrong reason.
Good point. So we have one from Bob Lior. Before I get to it, I would like to appeal to the audience. We have about 70 people watching. It's very abnormally low. So if I could get people to share the stream, it's very helpful. So is it of importance to note that while the physical effects of spending money raised by taxation are exactly similar to those of spending money raised by loan, in the latter case, half? Do you have any thoughts regarding that, Oliver?
Is that the end of the comment? I don't know. Can you give us a bit more?
I found the other one.
There you
sorry. It was, yeah. There we are. A financial asset is created, whereas in case of taxation, no financial asset is created. How would you interpret this passage in the monopoly of credit? Is taxation needlessly punitive?
Taxation can be punitive, especially in the particular ways that Douglas had indicated, like direct taxation, where depending on the tax code, the more money you make is the more money you take. Douglas often pointed out this is sort of a contradiction, that the rules of the game are, go to work or start a business and try to maximize financial profit. But if you're too successful, then you're going to be penalized. And so the inner logic of the system is sort of, it's kind of schizophrenic. I don't use that in a clinical sense, but it's contradictory. But maybe you've got something else in mind. I'd have to go back and look at that particular passage in context to see what exactly Douglas is saying there. But yeah, taxation, it's also, I haven't talked about this yet, but it's also problematic insofar as some people, won't name any names, but I actually heard someone say this once publicly, that it's very important that we pay our taxes because that's part of your civil duty, and you're being an honest citizen, and you're carrying your due weight and your burden and so on. But actually, and I'm not suggesting that people should lie or whatever, but the taxation system, because it depresses income, because you're confiscating a certain percentage of people's income, it actually drives people into the hands of the banks, because if you don't have enough money to make ends meet because you've lost 30, 40, 50% in taxation, well, now you need a loan, right? And the banks create that money out of nothing, and then they give you a loan. But of course, there's going to be interest that you're going to have to pay. So it's creating a situation where the government is, because they take so much in taxation, they could very well be driving you into the arms of the banker, who will also take their pound of flesh, right? So it's like a pincer movement.
Do you have any thoughts regarding that, Andre? Bob's questions are generally too advanced for my knowledge.
Well, you can answer, just like I do. Oliver was mentioning driving people into the kind hands of the bank or loan sharks. Because if you go to a bank and you declare bankrupt, try to get a loan after a bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck, because your credit score will go down. Nobody will want to lend you money. Like I always say, if you lend me $1,000 and I don't pay you back, I have a problem. If you lend me $1 million and I don't pay you back, you have a problem. You were fool enough to lend me $1 million without credential or without trust. So I think taxation has become something punitive. In the monopoly of credit, maybe, Oliver, you will eventually explain it. Taxation could always be a weapon if it is not used with a good moral code. Look at what Trump is doing with tariff. This is war. It's economic war. As soon as you rise tariff on a country, on a foreign country, you penalize the other country. Then you have counter tariff, and then you penalize the American, let's say Canada and United States. I wrote a small article a couple of months ago. I wanted to find it, I cannot, but it's like, okay, put tariff on my product. I will put tariff on yours. We will lower the quality of life of all our citizens, and they will think that we are in a war, economic war. Any type of measure, economic measure, can become punitive if it is not backed by a moral code.
Very good. So we have another one from Gary. How do we implement it and what scale? 2030 is just around the corner. Are you ready to go? Well, that's the big question, Gary. I think the first way, and you've already done it, is to repost the stream. But the first step is to educate people. People don't know this. I'm a guy that knows a lot of obscure things. I spend my life reading. I'm very curious. I was totally unaware of this, and this was huge in Canada. So it just goes to show there's a concerted effort to keep this down. So step one is to introduce it to people. Let people wrestle with these ideas. And I'm certain, I have faith that they will come to the same conclusion that I did, provided they're wrestling with it in good faith. What are your thoughts on this, Oliver?
I think that there's sort of an informational bottleneck. And if we can get the information out there to, I don't know what the magic number is, what the threshold would be, but if we can get the information out there to enough people, I don't think the 2030 agenda can go forward, because the powers that be can only push that under the supposition that there's no alternative. We have no alternative. This is what we have to do. Whatever the crisis is, whatever the pretext is. But if people understand Douglas social credit, the monetary reform proposals, the political reform proposals, then they'll know that that's simply not true. This is a viable alternative. Why don't we do this instead? Most people would prefer it. That's enough reason to have it. So, I think mass education, while it's not the whole story, it would take us more than halfway there.
Yeah, it's the necessary first step for sure. What are your thoughts regarding this, Andre?
Well, Gary's mentioning 2030. It's 111 years too late. It should have been 1929. And I think 1933, 34, that doctrine was quite popular because people were desperate. In Alberta, farmers were losing their farm, they were losing their crop, they could not pay their loans, and there was a momentum. He's referring to 2030, the United Nations 2030 agenda. It will not happen. It will not happen. We will see something much more greater before, and maybe the opportunity for a system like the doctrine of Douglas will finally arrive. Like we say, the golden years of an idea.
Okay, we actually have quite a quite a bit of questions here. Usually we don't, so I was taking my time before we get to them. I got to be selective now. We have one from Jose Bernier. I mentioned the 3 pre-Columbian empires to stress the reduction ad absurdum, to the extent that the theocracies committed sacrifice and cannibalism. Yes, JP, your comment explains my statement. Very good. So that's more of a comment. We'll go on to the next question. J.C. Denton. We live on planet Dentonia with J.C. Denton, the tomato farmer, and 100 laborers. I pay them $1 a day. I sell the tomatoes $2 a day. The government prints $1 a day. Is that DSC in a nutshell? Oliver?
Well, so 100 laborers, I pay them $1 a day, but you're selling for $2 a day. Now, presumably, if you're selling for $2 a day, the total production, it's because you've got capital costs to cover. Like, this is not a full dollar in profit. Maybe only 5% is profit. So you've got equipment, machinery that needs to be depreciated, that needs to be maintained. Maybe you've got a capital loan that you've got to pay back to the bank that you had borrowed in order to obtain the equipment on your tomato farm. The government prints $1 a day to compensate for the missing dollar, so that all the goods, all the tomatoes can be sold. You can think of it like that. Under the existing system, instead of the government, quote unquote, printing the $1 a day debt-free to fill the gap, we're borrowing the extra dollar so that you can sell all your tomatoes. Somebody has to go and get a credit card or a loan, or the government has to borrow from the banking system and spend it on government programs, production services, or maybe on a war. Or businesses have to start investing and trying to export more than they import in order to get that other dollar to achieve equilibrium in your example. So Douglas's whole point is, instead of all that extra debt, instead of all that extra work and activity, why don't we just figure out how much more money the system needs to achieve equilibrium and distribute it as a debt-free input for the benefit of consumers, because it's the consumer who should occupy the commanding heights of the government, commanding heights of the economy, not the government and not businesses. Government and businesses are servants, right? The consumer should be king, and the financial system should operate in his interest primarily and only secondarily in the interests of other players.
Do you have anything to add to that, Andre?
Well, Oliver was mentioning the consumer is king. We were always saying many decades ago, the consumer is always right. I'm sorry, try to buy something on Amazon and then struggle with Amazon to have a customer service, or your product does not arrive well, blah blah blah. We are like in a debt trap. It's a castle of Kafka. You can call the castle, but they never answer. Printing money is not the issue. Printing money is not the issue. This is sovereignty. This is sovereignty. And in a sovereign nation, the government is there as a last resort. If you have an earthquake, for example, and you have a lot of people who are without houses, you will gather the force of people to produce things. And I think the example of, $1 and sell the tomato $2, Oliver mentioned it, cost of production and filling the gap. We always talk about this, filling the gap. How do you fill the gap if you have a tornado and it kills or it destroys 50 houses? Look at the Amish, what they do. They gather 200 people and they rebuild the house in 3-4 days. There was 2 years ago, there was a tornado in Colorado, I think, or in United States. And the Amish, or there was a group of individuals that went there and they said, okay, we will rebuild the house. And the governor forbid them to rebuild the house without regulation. People were without houses, and there were a group of individuals who were ready to do it. So the idea is you mobilize people, to produce more, that's maybe in related with the dividend and the discount, the discount. You need to make the production and the consumption match. If it doesn't match, somebody will have to pay, and usually it's the customer.
Yeah, I just want to add, with regard to this particular example, in order to bring it closer into relation with reality, we could further suppose that every day you are borrowing $2 into existence from the bank, as in the form of a revolving line of credit. You're taking one of those dollars to pay your workers. You're taking the other dollar to, cover raw materials or equipment purchases or other costs. And in order to pay back your loan, you've got to get $2 from the public. Well, you've only distributed $1 in consumer buying power through the wages of your laborers. So under the existing system, your laborers, maybe they'll borrow the extra dollar that they need from the banks, or maybe the government will borrow that money and put other workers to work on something else so that they can buy the tomatoes. When you get the $2 back, you will then pay down your bank loan, and the money and the loan cancel each other out of existence. Now, on that particular model, of course, we haven't yet begun to factor in profit. We're just covering costs. And so the idea is the system is set up in such a way that you're not distributing enough income to offset all the costs you have to cover, because there are costs that are not distributable as concurrent income, real capital charges of various kinds. And the only way we can compensate for that under the existing system is somebody's got to go into debt. Somebody's got to borrow the extra money that's needed, whether it's government, business, or consumers.
It has to come from somewhere. So we got one more. A sin tax would be punitive, but it must be indirect. And this is from Jose Bernier. Now, Oliver, I must admit, I was not aware of a sin tax, so I'm going to make the assumption that a lot of the audience aren't. Could you explain this to me a little bit?
So sin tax is, if the government wants to disincentivize certain behaviors, let's say there's too much drinking in our community, so we're going to make it prohibitively expensive in order to cut down on the population's drinking. So maybe instead of just having, let's say, GST on the alcohol, we'll have 50% tax, or have 100% tax. Same with cigarettes, so we're trying to, because that's not good for you, right? So the government's being paternalistic and wanting to discourage people from spending. I mean, that's the official story, right? They want to discourage people from spending excess amounts of money on these vices. But of course, if people are hooked, it's also very lucrative for them to have these sin taxes too, because they know the people won't be able to resist the temptation. So, well, we'll have 50%, we'll have 100%, we'll have 150% tax. And just think of all the money we can rake in, because people will not, if they're addicted to something, they're not going to be able to say, oh, that's too expensive, I can't afford that. They'll find a way. So
it's so sinister, man. And that's absolutely right. So with that said, that brings us to the end. I want to let everyone know we derive most of our views long after the live broadcast, so I will appeal one more time. I know it's repetitive. Please share the stream and even potentially consider sending it to someone that you think might like to engage with this type of content. We do this every Monday at 7 p.m., and I have another show that I'm doing, Social Credit Voices. And we have Mr. Robert Klink, longtime social creditor, coming on. We do this every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. So with that said, do you gentlemen have any parting words? We'll start with you, Andre.
Well, a sin tax. Oliver was mentioning a sin tax. If we are able to implement a good economic system, maybe sin will decrease.
Yes.
Ideally so. Do you have any last words, Oliver?
Well, I just encourage everyone to take a closer look at Douglas Social Credit. It does take a bit of investment of time and energy to understand it. But once you understand it, you just can't look at the world the same way. And all these sort of debates that people fall into left and right, it just doesn't make any sense anymore. So it's a kind of evolution in your thinking, and it's absolutely vital that as many people evolve in their thinking as quickly as possible, if we are to overcome the challenges that beset us.
You said that to me when I first met you, that you can't look at the world in the same way when you actually learn this. And that was so accurate. It freaks me out sometimes. It really does. But with that said, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for coming out. Cheers.